It was fortunate that Krivax had already been acting as Azrael Nerub's unofficial head diplomat before being assigned to his new role. Otherwise, he would be feeling completely out of his depth. At least I finally have all of my legs back. Currently, Krivax was waiting in Dalaran's main portal hub for the Kirin Tor to finish creating a portal that would connect to Ironforge. The Horde's warlocks had apparently performed rituals to corrupt the ley lines near the dwarven capital and prevent any mages from teleporting to the city. Through the combined efforts of the Kirin Tor, the Circle of Viziers, and a few members of the Blue Dragonflight, the ley lines were now cleared, and it was now possible to connect the dwarves with the rest of the Alliance. The Kirin Tor would do the same for Nerubian soon, but Krivax was scheduled to visit Ironforge first. This would be his first time going out on a diplomatic mission without Hadix or a Nerubian watching over him. Vizier Hadix was busy meeting with Alliance leaders and the Church of Holy Light to discuss a strategy to deal with the growing prevalence of void cults throughout the Eastern Kingdoms after the Cathrax attack on Capital City. While the Order of Kalchut had been wrong about a few things, they were correct to assume that once the void became publicly known, there would be many crazy people drawn into it. A Nerubian, on the other hand, was training his first batch of Nerubian warriors in the ways of the light at the Bastion of the Silver Hand in Stratm alongside its paladins. Krivax was happy when he heard about it, and he hoped the Guardians of Nerub would help Azrael Nerub survive the Lich King when the time came. Krivax had offered Masruk a spot in his guard detail, but his friend had expressed an interest in focusing on his training. Masruk had admitted that he felt like a power gap was growing between him and Krivax, and he wanted to use this time to close it as much as possible. The Spiderlord responsible for teaching him was apparently one of Azrael Nerub's best trainers. Although he missed Masruk's company, Krivax hoped his friend would get the results he was looking for. That left Krivax on his own to handle the important task of establishing diplomatic contact with Ironforge. He had a few guards, of course, but they weren't exactly great conversation partners like Masruk. Not only that, but Krivax still had a deluge of other work that he needed to attend to. Even now, he was using all four of his hands to read through the Foreign Outreach Division's daily paperwork. Krivax was very glad for privacy enchantments, or else he would be forced to sit in a sealed room all day handling confidential documents. The first thing that he had done after being appointed as Azrael Nerub's leading diplomat was to choose ambassadors to send to each of the Eastern Kingdom's nations. It hadn't been easy to find viziers who weren't horribly xenophobic and socially blunt, but Krivax felt the ones he had picked were at least able to hide it. For the most part, Krivax had come to the conclusion that eventually he would have to train fresh and promising hatchlings into efficient ambassadors and diplomats in the future. Due to their administrative training and lack of experience in dealing with other nations, they were constantly sending daily information updates from their respective nations for Krivax to look over. Currently, the ambassador to Quel'Thalas was giving Krivax the most headaches because Azrael Nerub seemed to be displacing one of the High Elves' trading monopolies. They had previously controlled the market of most high-end textiles throughout the Eastern Kingdoms, with Dalaran being their far second. Azrael Nerub was gradually increasing trade with foreign nations, and the Eastern Kingdoms were already being flooded with cheap, quality silk products. This included things like clothes, ropes, sailcloths, and construction tarpaulins. There was even a long list of silk goods that Krivax didn't even know were produced in Azrael Nerub. Even after living as a giant spider person for over 6 years, he was still surprised to learn just how many things could be made with silk. Krivax was also keeping an eye out for the metal prices in the Eastern continent in the various reports. He knew that the dwarves and gnomes typically produced the majority of the metal goods and machinery sold among the human kingdoms. He hoped to reach an agreement with the dwarves and gnomes that would allow Azrael Nerub to focus on enchanted metal products in order to make use of the vast mining operations in Northrend. The construction of Azrael Nerub's northern settlement on the continent was currently underway. Alcala would be built in the mountains close to Alteric's border with Stromgarde, as originally agreed upon, near Chillwind Pass. Judging by the reports being sent by the ambassadors to Stromgarde, Krivax could already tell that the place would be a persistent political headache due to the contested borders. Thankfully, the one that would be built near Stormwind should cause much fewer problems. Lordaeron had recently reiterated its commitment to helping Stormwind rebuild, but that would have to wait until after the political summit. The nations of the Eastern Kingdom couldn't afford to delay too long in making a decision regarding the captured orcs. Just as Krivax was about to read the report sent from the ambassador to Gilneas, he was pulled from his thoughts by a voice that he hadn't heard in a while. "Hey there, Krivax. Long time no see." Krivax looked down and saw the cheerful face of Trixie Tinkrench, with Malzy Stonehallow standing by her side. "Trixie, Malzy, I'm surprised to see the two of you here. I thought that you would both be traveling with the refugees on their way back to Kaz Moden," Krivax said cheerfully. He was glad to see a few familiar faces joining him on his trip to Ironforge. "We probably would be, but Malzy's clan are a bunch of big shots, so we've received permission to use the portal," said Trixie, answering his unspoken question. Since portals could only handle a limited amount of traffic, the only people who would be using them were aristocrats, foreign dignitaries, and other important individuals. Krivax vaguely remembered Malzy mentioning something about his family, but he couldn't recall the exact details. "Clan Stonehallow has a permanent seat in Ironforge's Senate. I'll introduce you when we get there," Malzy elaborated. "I would appreciate that. It would be helpful if I had someone to show me through the city," said Krivax, grateful for the offer. "Oh, you don't need a politician for something like that, lad. I'd be glad to do it myself," said Malzy. "It's the least I could do given the circumstances." "Ah, what circumstances?" Krivax asked in confusion. "We do remember that you were the one responsible for Azrael Nerub establishing contact with the Eastern Kingdoms," said Trixie. "Azrael Nerub helped out a lot with fighting the Horde off until those dragons decided to stop the war. A lot more people would have died if not for you." "Aye, the lass is right. Who knows what could have happened?" said Malzy, nodding in agreement. "Don't worry, Krivax. You're a friend of the Stonehallow clan now. We'll make sure that you don't have any problems in Ironforge." Krivax wasn't quite sure what to say. This wasn't his first time receiving recognition for his actions during the Second War, but it was the first time someone had praised him for saving lives. Given how much sleep he had lost over the Cathrax attack, it was a nice thing to be told. "Thank you. Hearing that means more than you know," said Krivax, his voice quiet and full of emotion. After taking a moment to compose himself, he turned to Trixie and quickly changed the subject. "Shouldn't you be waiting for the portal to Nerubian? I imagine that you must be eager to see your family again after a long time apart." Trixie's smile dimmed around the edges a bit before she responded. "My family managed to send me a letter after the siege was broken. They're okay. Ironforge is connected to Nerubian by tunnels, so I can go see them once this is all over. So don't worry about it. I can wait a little while longer." "I'm glad to hear that." Deciding to read the rest of his reports later, Krivax spent the rest of his waiting time catching up with Trixie and Malzy. Listening to them talk about everything they had gone through since he had last seen them was very interesting, especially in the case of Trixie. Krivax had known that she and a Nerubian had fought together in several battles, but her stories about riding on his back and throwing makeshift bombs at the Horde were highly entertaining. Eventually, Krivax sensed a surge of arcane magic and the familiar feeling of a portal opening nearby and informed his two companions about it, much to their excitement. Once the Kirin Tor finished testing the portal and making the appropriate preparations, one of the mages came to inform Krivax that it was safe for him to go through. "Are the two of you ready?" asked Krivax, ignoring his guards as they took a defensive formation around him and his companions. "Yes, lad. I'm ready to see home again," Malzy said with clear longing in his voice. "Me too," Trixie said eagerly. "There were times that I was sure we'd never make it back. I can't wait to see all of my friends back at the Explorers League headquarters in Ironforge." "All right. Then there's no reason for us to wait," Krivax said before nodding to the leader of his guard detail. Krivax watched as a few of his guards stepped through the portal first and followed after them once they verified it was safe. The first thing that Krivax noticed once he took his first step into Ironforge was that he was undoubtedly underground. There was a stillness to the air that made him feel more at home than he had ever felt in Dalaran or Capital City. The second thing that Krivax noticed was the many dwarven guards were looking up at him in astonishment and vague repulsion. Oh, yeah. This is the first time they're seeing Nerubians. Although there were still many humans who stared at Nerubians with disgust, and there probably always would be, most of them simply looked away when they passed by. The reaction of the guards reminded Krivax of the first time he stepped foot on the Eastern Kingdoms, and he actually felt a faint nostalgia for when his life was simpler. Greetings, everyone. I am Vizier Krivax of Azrael Nerub, and I am here to meet with King Magni Bronzebeard, Krivax said as affably as possible. He knew the importance of first impressions. The dwarves traded uncertain glances with one another until their apparent leader stepped forward. Well met, Vizier. I apologize for all of the gawking. We were warned ahead of time, but seeing you spiderfolk in person is something else. Your apologies aren't necessary. I'm more than used to it, said Krivax, his mandibles clicking together in amusement. Thank you, Vizier. If there's nothing else, then I'll escort you and your people to the king and the senate, said the guard captain. I was told that they've been waiting for your arrival. The Krivax's guards and the dwarves spent a few awkward moments positioning themselves around each other as they prepared to escort him through the city. They eventually settled on a formation that had Krivax's guards on the inside and the dwarves farther out, providing a buffer between the Nerubians and the locals. Trixie and Malzi walked close to Krivax, chatting amiably and occasionally pointing out the sights as they walked out of the portal chamber and into the city proper. Aside from Quel'Thalas, Ironforge was the city that Krivax was most excited about seeing in the Eastern Kingdoms. The dwarven capital was a bustling metropolis carved into the heart of a massive mountain, and its architecture was far different from any of the human cities he had visited. Stone buildings containing shops and homes were built into the walls, and the streets were filled with movement as the citizens of Ironforge went about their business. There were also bright lamps with beautiful designs placed evenly along each street. Krivax was immediately assaulted by the loud sounds of hammers striking anvils and an intense heat emanating from the center of the city. The ceiling stretched far higher than Krivax had expected, and he couldn't help but be amazed as he wondered how the dwarves managed to build such a city. Ironforge's citizens looked far healthier than they should for people who had been under siege for over a year. Krivax assumed that the city must have an extensive network of underground tunnels and full storerooms that had allowed them to endure the siege with minimal suffering. Most of them were staring at him and his guards with expressions of either astonishment or aversion, as he had expected. "We're about to reach the Great Forge District," Malzi said with excitement. "If you thought this was impressive, then you're in for a treat, lad." Krivax was already familiar with what to expect, but seeing the Great Forge District in person was an entirely different experience. The district was a marvel of engineering and craftsmanship, centered around an enormous forge that was fueled by carefully directed streams of molten lava. The heat was even more intense here, and the sounds of hammering and industry were deafening. Krivax quickly cast a ward around himself and his guards to keep the worst of the heat and noise away. They were soon standing outside of the so-called High Seat, which served as Ironforge's throne room, located next to the Great Forge District. The guards stationed outside, equipped with master-crafted armor that radiated magic, studied the incoming group with vigilance. Krivax was impressed by the imposing entrance, the intricate stone carvings, and the sheer grandeur of it all. As they approached, one of King Magni's guards stepped forward and stopped them from entering. "Halt! Which of you is Vizier Krivax of Azrael Nerub?" "That would be me," said Krivax, even as he thought to himself that his identity should be obvious from the position of the guards. "I have been sent here to meet with King Magni Bronzebeard on a diplomatic mission. I believe he is expecting me." The guard studied him for a moment before responding. "Aye, we were informed of your arrival. Your guards will wait outside of the High Seat while you, Malzi Stonehallow, and Trixie Tinkrench will be permitted inside." I will escort you to the waiting room until King Magni grants you an audience. Is this acceptable? It is, Krivax said immediately before ordering his guards to wait outside. No reasonable monarch would ever allow armed soldiers from a nation they barely knew anything about into their throne room. That was just common sense. Unlike many human buildings, Krivax had no difficulty entering the high seat, as the dwarves strangely seemed to prefer ceilings and doorways far higher than would be necessary. The interior of the building was as grand as its entrance, with towering stone columns and statues of dwarven heroes lining the walls. Krivax was also able to sense wards weaved throughout the building, which explained how the royal court managed to function near such a noisy district. The dwarves walking through the high seats halls were obviously very wealthy, as nearly every person that Krivax passed by was wearing well-made enchanted jewelry. The guards led them through several corridors before they reached a small, yet lavish waiting room. You will be informed when King Magni is ready to receive you, one of the guards informed Krivax before leaving the room. Once they settled into the room and began trying the snacks and refreshments left for them, Malzi turned to Krivax with a reassuring smile. Don't worry, lad. I've met the king a fair few times. He can be a tad stern, but I've always known him to be a fair ruler. Thank you, Malzi. I'm hopeful that this will be the start of a long and beneficial relationship between Azrael Nerub and Ironforge, Krivax said genuinely. If you want someone to comfort, then I'm the one you should be talking to, said Trixie as she nervously munched on some kind of pastry. I've never even seen the king before, let alone talk to him. Not all of us are aristocrats or diplomats who are used to this sort of thing. Well, there's a first time for everything, said Malzi. Chances are good that the king will call the both of us first, but you don't need to worry. I'll do most of the talking for the both of us. What? Why would the king want to talk to us first? Trixie asked in shock. He'll want to hear what we have to say about the state of our kin in Lordaeron and also about our spidery friends, lass, Malzi explained calmly. King Magni will probably call for us first, and then Krivax once he's done with us. Trixie was not happy to hear that and continued to distract herself with delicious snacks. It wasn't long before Malzi was proven right when a guard entered the room and announced that King Magni was calling for the two of them. As they were escorted out, Krivax decided to indulge himself in the shellfish that Ironforge had thoughtfully prepared for him, but he was unexpectedly interrupted when a dwarf wearing a wide-brimmed safari hat walked into the room. Unlike all of the other finely dressed dwarves that Krivax had seen in the high seat, this one wore gear fit for climbing mountains and had a pistol strapped to his side. His hair was the color of bronze and he studied Krivax with an open curiosity that lacked any of the disgust that he was used to seeing. Ah, you're a sizable one. My gut tells me that you must be that Nerubian diplomat Krivax, yes? Said the strangely dressed dwarf. I'm Bran Bronzebeard, brother of the king and leader of the Explorers League. A fine pleasure to meet you, friend. Krivax was suddenly struck dumb as he suddenly found himself face to face with the exact person who he most needed to meet. Bran Bronzebeard was a legendary explorer in Warcraft lore and was often at the center of any events relating to Azeroth's Titan facilities. Krivax wasn't naive enough to believe that he could reasonably access Uddaman on his own. Not only would he risk running afoul of the facility's defenses, but the keeper within Uddaman would most likely associate any Nerubian with the old gods and designate them as a threat immediately. Out of all the people in Azeroth who could realistically enter a Titan facility safely and then convince a reawakened keeper to help the world, Bran Bronzebeard was the best option. It's nice to meet you as well, said Krivax once he managed to pull himself together. Trixie and Malzi have been telling me stories about you ever since Azrael Nerub first came into contact with the Explorers League. I am Vizier Krivax, leader of Azrael Nerub's Foreign Outreach Division. So they have? Well, I've heard my fair share about you Nerubians too. If it weren't for the blasted horde, then I'd have set off on an expedition to Northrend as soon as we first made contact, said Bran, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. When word reached my ears that you'd be waiting here all alone, I couldn't help myself but come and have a gander. And am I as interesting as you hoped? Krivax asked curiously. Bran's response was filled with enthusiasm as he continued to study Krivax. "Oh, you certainly are unique. I've seen a fair share of folk in my travels, but most of them are at least shaped like a dwarf. How in Azeroth do you manage to control all of them limbs of yours? And what's it like looking at the world with 8 eyes?" Krivax was amused by the dwarf's blatant fascination and decided to indulge him. "Coordinating 8 limbs is a lot like coordinating 4, I would imagine." Trixie wondered the same thing, and we found out that Nerubian eyes are better at seeing in the dark than most and have a wider field of vision. Although the surface races do seem to be better at tracking long-distance objects. Aside from their lifespans, most of the races in the Eastern Kingdoms weren't all that different biologically, especially dwarves, gnomes, and humans. That wasn't particularly surprising given that they shared a common ancestral origin in this world. Elves also looked mostly the same as humans, but they had many differences with the other races that manifested mostly in matters related to magic. That makes sense to me. Seeing in the dark is really useful for folks who live underground, after all. Us dwarves can see in dark places a wee bit better than most, but we still need those lanterns we got hanging around everywhere. Bran grumbled to himself before perking back up. Will Azrael Nerub let the Explorers League send a team to come to visit? I reckon I must have read through the description Trixie and Milesy gave of your cities a half-dozen times already. Actually, that's one topic that I wanted to discuss with you and your brother, Krivax said eagerly, glad that Bran was moving the conversation in this direction. There really wasn't an appropriate time to organize it during the war, but Azrael Nerub and the Explorers League would benefit a lot from cooperating with one another. Given your position, I'm sure you've heard a lot about the recent revelations relating to human and elf history. I surely have. Every scholar in Ironforge is itching to learn no more about the Vrykul, and the elves are madder than a dwarf who's just found his anvil being used as a gnome's dinner plate. Bran chuckled at his own joke. They certainly were. If there was anything that could piss off the High Elves, it was being told that their ancestors were originally trolls. Azrael Nerub can confirm those things to be true for 2 reasons. First is that our kingdom is incredibly old and we have maintained detailed records throughout our history, Krivax explained. That was especially the case once the kingdom repossessed the documents kept by the Order of Kalchut. The races of the Eastern Kingdoms weren't the only ones going through a period of historical rediscovery. And the second is due to the Titan facility built in the northernmost part of Northrend, as well as the various structures left behind by their constructs. Predictably, that was enough to completely capture Bran's attention. Is this related to those reports you folks gave the League about them Iron Dwarfs and Frostborn up on Northrend? What do you folk know about the Titans? Asked Bran, all pretense gone as he stared up at Krivax with a hunger for knowledge. I've searched in high and low for anything I could find about them and the history of my people for most of my life. It's why my brothers and I founded the League in the first place. We don't know much about the Titans themselves, other than that they were godlike beings who built unimaginably advanced facilities throughout Azeroth, Krivax said honestly. After the Order's dissolution and the sharing of their records, the Titans had a popular topic of research recently. As for your people's history, we know a good amount, even if much of it is speculation. Still, we do have a sizable amount of circumstantial evidence. During his discussion with the High King, they had already thoroughly gone over what information Azrael Nerub knew about that the dwarves and gnomes would be interested in. This was good for Krivax, as it helped him sort out which details among his meta-knowledge were already known or could be reasonably inferred. For example, Azrael Nerub has detailed records of Titan-originating constructs shaped almost identically to Vrykuls, dwarves, and gnomes, Krivax revealed, much to Bran's astonishment. The truth of the matter isn't known to us, but the leading theory among the Circle of Viziers is that an ancient spell was responsible for turning a portion of these constructs into their more biological counterparts. These beings would presumably be your ancestors. The less likely possibility was that the Titans simply looked into Azeroth's future and chose to shape their servants in your images. As someone who already knew the truth of the matter, it was fascinating to see just how close the scholars were getting with their theories. There were even some among the circle of viziers who correctly connected this matter to the void's proclivity for manipulating flesh. When Azul-Nerub eventually learned about the curse of flesh, Krivax predicted that there would be many smug viziers being proven right. "I reckon I've seen something like that," Bran said hesitantly, his gaze distant as he lost himself in memories. "I was exploring some old ruins in the eastern parts of Khaz Modan and saw a shattered dwarf made of enchanted stone. We thought it was some kind of statue, but it had magic on it that reminded us of the elves' golems. And you say that you folk have seen a lot of these dwarf-shaped constructs up in Northrend?" "We have. Most of them are alive as well. We don't know very much about them since they're either rather aggressive or in dangerous territory, but Azul-Nerub sees value in working with the Explorers League to know more." If Krivax ever had any worries about convincing Bran to work with him to explore Udaman, they disappeared completely when he saw the dwarf's reaction. Under his safari hat, Bran's eyes lit up with wonder and excitement as he stared at Krivax as if he had suddenly transformed into a treasure trove of ancient knowledge. "You have no idea how long we've been hunting for answers like these, Vizier Krivax," Bran said, his voice filled with gratitude and awe. "Of course, I'd be more than willing to cooperate with your people in this. Once this whole audience matter is taken care of, we ought to start planning an expedition to Northrend right away. Actually, I feel like it would be best if we first explore the Titan facility here in Khaz Modan," said Krivax, going in for the kill as he retrieved the map to Udaman from his spatial bag. "During the Second War, I decided to hire the venture company to search the Eastern Kingdoms for anything resembling the facility on Northrend. We used records provided by the Explorers League to choose where we would look, and one of them was successful." At this point, Bran was practically vibrating in place as he looked at the map Krivax had unfolded. Is this truly real? Are you sure I haven't drunk too much ale and dozed off? If there's a genuine Titan facility here in Khaz Modan, then there's no place in Azeroth more likely to hold the secret of my people's history. I have to get there." Krivax was vaguely worried that the dwarf was about to start running to Udaman right at that moment. Azul-Nerub would like to organize an expedition to Udaman in cooperation with the Explorers League immediately after the conclusion of the upcoming post-war summit. That seemed to bring Bran back to reality, and he let out a string of curses that would make a Kultiran sailor blush. "Damned orcs. First, they stopped me from going to Northrend. Then, they kept us holed up in Ironforge for over a year, and now they're delaying the most important archaeological undertaking in Dwarven history." "There's no need to be so upset, Mr. Bronzebeard," Krivax said placatingly, startled by the dwarf's anger. "The summit is going to take place very soon now that Ironforge and Nerubian have been reconnected to the Alliance. The Alliance can't afford to leave the matter of the Horde unaddressed for very long, after all." Bran began to calm down at the reminder. "I suppose you're right. This is definitely important enough that it deserves to be taken care of. Besides, I can use this time to plan a proper expedition with all of my top-notch explorers. Oh, and you can just call me Bran, lad. You've already done too much to be acting formally." Krivax nodded, pleased with the dwarf's enthusiasm. "Very well, Bran. If all goes well with King Magni, then we should have some time to discuss the matter further while I'm in Ironforge. Oh, I'm sure everything will turn out fine. The audience is mostly just a formality and a way for the senators to gawk at the strange new foreigners by now," Bran said dismissively, his focus completely on the map to Udaman. "Azul-Nerub is a sturdy nation and you guys have done a great deal for the Alliance during the war. There's hardly a chance of you being turned away, if you ask me." Krivax already knew that to be the case, but it still felt strange hearing it from the king's own brother. Before he could respond, their conversation was interrupted by one of the guards informing them that King Magni was ready to grant Krivax an audience. Krivax put away the map and prepared himself before following the guard out of the room with Bran following behind. As he made his way through the halls of High Seat, Krivax did his best to calm his nerves. Once they reached the actual throne room, he was struck by how much different it was from what he remembered from Warcraft. Like most of Ironforge, The throne room was cavernous with masterfully worked stone and metal along the pillars and walls, from which banners displaying Ironforge's emblem were on proud display. Large ornate lanterns were cleverly hung from the ceiling to light up the room and draw attention to the throne. The left and right sections of the room had been carved out and filled with seats for Ironforge's many senators, and Krivax could see their baffled expressions as they stared at him as if he were a strange animal. Ignoring their inquisitive gazes, Krivax made his way toward the throne at a steady pace. Seated on that throne was King Magni Bronzebeard himself, a regal figure with a long braided beard that perfectly reflected his name. The king's eyes were sharp, and his expression showed nothing about what he was thinking. He wore a resplendent suit of armor which seemed to have been polished to perfection for the occasion. A heavy golden crown adorned his brow, and at his side were two unique and magnificent hammers that glowed brightly with magic. Once King Magni's guards informed him that he was close enough, Krivax bowed politely to King Magni before speaking. "Greetings, King Magni Bronzebeard, King of Kars Moden and High Thane of Clan Bronzebeard. I am Vizier Krivax of Azrael Nerub, and I have been sent by High King Nerubian to establish peaceful contact between your people and my own." "Well met, Vizier Krivax. I have heard much about your people and you specifically since your arrival in the Eastern Kingdoms," said King Magni, his voice deep and commanding as it echoed throughout the chamber. "I have heard tales of Azrael Nerub's great assistance in fighting against the Horde and your diplomatic efforts toward the other nations of this land. Ironforge welcomes you, and we look forward to a long and fruitful relationship." Krivax felt a wave of relief at the king's words and let out a sigh of relief. The next portion of the meeting was largely ceremonial in nature as gifts were exchanged between the two nations to commemorate their first meeting. Krivax presented a ceremonial shield made with a titanium frame and protective enchanted silk cloth that displayed the emblem of Azrael Nerub. Titanium was much rarer in the Eastern Kingdoms than in Northrend, so the gift was meant to display what Azrael Nerub had to offer. One of the guards presented Krivax with a master-crafted ceremonial war hammer made from mithril, with several complex runes carved into its head and handle. The symbol of Ironforge was embossed on the hammerhead. After the gifts were given, King Magni asked several questions about the upcoming summit and the Alliance's ongoing efforts to deal with the Horde remnants. It quickly became clear to Krivax that he shouldn't expect Ironforge to show much leniency toward the captured orcs. He also asked several pointed questions about the settlement Azrael Nerub would be building on the southern portion of the continent. It would be located between the northern Elwyn Mountains and the southern side of the Redridge Mountains. This placed them close to the main trading routes to Kars Moden and Stormwind and also placed Azrael Nerub on the front lines of anything that might come down south from the Burning Steppes. The Dark Iron Dwarves had never shown any interest in invading Stormwind, but that didn't mean they never would. Krivax tried to bring up the idea of a potential trade agreement, but King Magni made clear to him that any such deal should first be discussed in a later meeting with the Senate. Attempts to probe Ironforge's interest in technological exchange were similarly postponed to a future meeting. A request to establish ambassadors between their two nations was met with assurances that it would be quickly agreed upon by the Senate. When all was said and done, Krivax left the meeting with a feeling that Azrael Nerub's ambassador would have to be someone tolerant of and good at bureaucracy. Krivax decided to spend the next week learning everything he could about Ironforge's political system. He wished that he had more time, but Krivax expected that he would soon become extremely busy. After all of the Alliance's leaders would soon be meeting in Dalaran to decide the fate of the Horde and discuss what to do about the Dark Portal. The private audience with King Magni was not nearly as nerve-wracking as Trixie thought it would be. It was mainly just to get Malzi's and her personal thoughts on Azrael Nerub and the Nerubians as a whole before he publicly met Krivax in front of the Senate and other important dwarves. Both of them had spoken honestly to the king. They had told King Magni about how the kingdom was powerful and its people a little standoffish but good at heart. Considering the aid they provided the Alliance during the war with the Horde, the Nerubians were practically unofficial members themselves now. While most Nerubians weren't easy to connect with, Krivax, Nerubian, and Masruk had all eventually opened up to her. It was easiest to think of them kind of like the High Elves. Only less dickish. She was proud to say she got a laugh out of the king at that. After assuring them both that he trusted the Nerubians and that he just wanted to know the personal experiences of his kin when dealing with them, King Magni informed the guards to allow Krivax into the throne room. From there it was the usual flowery introductions, ceremonial gift-giving, and then followed by a small meet and greet with the upper class of Ironforge. Malzi helped introduce Krivax to the most important folk. Thane Muradin Bronzebeard, the king's own brother, talked to the Nerubians about leading the Ironforge's warriors to join the Alliance army's march south. Malzi's father, a senator, was very interested in the economic benefits Azrael Nerub might provide Ironforge in the future after a solid trade deal with the Senate had been hashed out. Even Princess Moira Bronzebeard, the heir to the throne of Ironforge, had joined the gathering. Trixie did notice that Krivax seemed to freeze up with shock at the sight of the princess before he quickly returned to normal. She could understand his reaction given that the dwarves of Ironforge were pretty patriarchal in general. Krivax had probably done some research beforehand, so the idea of a female heir had likely thrown him for a loop. Trixie found it pretty stupid herself since it shouldn't matter what was between the legs of the person, only what they could do. That was how gnomes did it after all. From the rumors she heard back home, King Magni loved his daughter and supported her as his heir, but he would have preferred to have had a son. The king apparently didn't think a woman could rule as well as a man. Unfortunately, that was something his daughter was certainly aware of. That had to be hard to deal with. Trixie was glad her family drama was so much tamer in comparison. If it wasn't for her boss, Bran himself, tagging along the meet and greet session would have been pretty boring. The boss though had this energy about him that had him excited and distracted throughout the whole thing. When she asked about it, he only said it was gonna be a surprise once it was all set up and swore Krivax to secrecy in front of her. Leaving her out of plans and hijacking her friend. How rude. She should complain to management about this abuse of power. Her silly thoughts aside, Bran only got this way when he was planning a big expedition. Trixie was sure that he had talked to Krivax about a trip to Northrend or something after the mess with the remains of the Horde was dealt with. She was going to make sure that she and Malzi were sure to be included in the expedition. But that was for later. After all the boring stuff, Bran took Krivax and the Nerubian delegation on a tour of Ironforge. The tour turned out to be a very detailed one as Bran excitedly talked about every district, led the Nerubians to his favorite shops, and showed the various artifacts in the Hall of Explorers. Once the tour was finally over, it was time for the fun stuff. To Nomeregan, Trixie said dramatically as she and Krivax bid farewell to Bran and Malzi. Trixie felt excited as she led the spiderfolk to the main tunnel that led directly to her hometown. How long do we have to walk to reach the city through the tunnel? Krivax asked curiously and reached into his spatial bag for some stamina potions. PSSSD, walk nothing. We're traveling in style. Trixie said as they entered the train depot and showed off their transport. Say hello to the Nomeregan Express. At her words, the gleaming steam locomotive, a marvel of steam technology, let loose an ear-piercing whistle. This baby will turn what would be hours of marching underground into a smooth and comfortable ride there in less than 20 minutes. Trixie proudly declared. Astounding, Krivax said as he studied the train with a thoughtful expression. Do you mind if I ask questions about it during the trip? So long as you are ready for me to talk your ear off. Trixie replied with a smile. After all, what honest gnome didn't like Tinker talk? And that's how all the excess smoke exhaust is safely pumped out of the tunnel to avoid buildup, Trixie finished explaining as she and her party disembarked from the train and onto Nomeregan's own train station. Very interesting and inventive, Krivax replied as they stopped before a rare group of armed gnomes with a very important person leading them. Greetings outsiders, and welcome to Nomeregan, the most advanced city in the world. I am Sikotha Maplug, advisor to the High Tinker, and I will be your escort to the Tinker's court. Once again Trixie noticed that Krivax stopped short and examined Sikotha Maplug with surprise. She honestly couldn't blame him. The Vice High Tinker was a big deal after all. "Greetings, Tinker Thermaplug, you honor us by personally coming to receive us," Krivax said politely and made a slight bow. "No need to be too formal, Krivax. We aren't as gruff as the dwarves after all." Trixie nudged him in the side to get him to relax. "It's only right to give proper deference towards one of the leaders of another nation, Trixie," Krivax returned before turning to Sicko. "I'm sure the Tinker Thermaplug has a great deal more important things to do than escort us after all." "Indeed, but the High Tinker asked and therefore I'm obligated to do so," Sicko shrugged. "My time is valuable though, so I hope we can get this done sooner, rather than later." "Oh, come on. I really wanted to give Krivax the grand tour. And the court is all the way on the lowest level." Trixie complained much to Sicko Thermaplug's annoyance. "I'm sure we can do the tour after the meeting is over," Krivax quickly said to Trixie while looking at Sicko. "That way Tinker Thermaplug here doesn't have to escort us longer than necessary." "Finn," Trixie grumbled. "I'll hold you to it." "Then if you would please follow me," Sicko said as they began their trek through the city and towards the Tinker's court. Seriously, why did they have to be stuck with a stick in the mud like Sicko of all people? The Tinker's court, located deep within Nerubian, was a large circular metal chamber lit up with spotlights and surrounded by large metal busts of old gnomish kings and high tinkers gazing down upon their descendants. It was less a throne room like in Ironforge, since her people have had no kings in centuries, and more a gathering place for all the highly ranked tinkers in Nerubian to come together to talk, swap ideas, and do the boring stuff of governance. Trixie was pretty sure they did as little of the latter as possible, since gnome society was pretty hands-off on most things unless it negatively impacted others. For example, the Office of Quality Control made sure all new inventions and creations met a certain threshold of quality and safety in their blueprints before manufacturing. Last thing anyone wanted was some young gnome rushing things like a goblin and blowing themselves up with their creation randomly, especially if it wasn't even designed to explode. Otherwise, the government left most gnomes free to come up with any design they wanted to work on. Anyway, it was a pretty impressive place and naturally where Krivax was guided to officially meet the High Tinker. "I am honored to give to you a tapestry woven by some of our best weavers," Krivax said as he handed the folded-up gift to High Tinker Jelbin Mekatork who, as with most things he did, accepted it with a smile. Heck, he even unfolded the thing and had a few aides pull it taut to reveal the Vizier Technology Division symbol beautifully woven on it. "Ha ha. Very well made. I dare say our automatic looms would need quite a few upgrades to possibly compete with this." Jelbin laughed as he folded the tapestry back up and put it to the side. Trixie couldn't help but laugh since she just knew that would just energize the tinkers who made said looms to improve them. "In return, I give to you an invention of my own personal design. The suck cannon," Jelbin said with excitement, bringing out an odd device. Krivax in turn graciously accepted the suck cannon stamped with the icon of technology. Trixie chuckled at his look of confusion at the ovoid-shaped object with a vacuum muzzle at the end and a handlebar at its back with a tube leading to the main mechanism. "I worked on this prototype myself. It can vacuum up anything and then shoot it back out with a boom," Jelbin proudly announced. "You see that dent there? I used the suck cannon on my half-eaten sandwich by mistake and launched it at the wall." "Impressive," Krivax said as he examined the device gingerly. "Whether it's cleaning up around the house or the battlefield, this baby can suck up the worst of it and shoot right back out," Jelbin said as he happily demonstrated the device, sucking up a whole cart full of scrap that was dumped onto the floor by another gnome. Then they watched as Jelbin fired off the scrap at some makeshift targets, tearing them to pieces. She wanted one. She wanted one so bad. "I'm sure my people will find a great use for it," Krivax said as he carefully put the device in his bag. "Be sure to send me your thoughts as you use it, since no device is perfect and upgrading an invention is even more fun than just building it," Jelbin said with a laugh. "Of course, and I'm sure my people would love to learn more about your technology in general," Krivax said. They were all very impressed at the toys Trixie traded with the Tuskar along with her usage of the shrink ray in battles with the Horde. It's not often that we find ourselves lacking knowledge in certain fields of science after all. And we'll be happy to teach you, Jelbin said easily enough. Having more heads around to tinker talk is only a good thing after all. Indeed, Krivax said before becoming more somber. While I would love to talk about nice things all day, there are a few political matters to go over. Ah, of course. Nasty business but business nonetheless, Jelbin said with markedly less cheer but still in good spirits. We can do that in private later though. I hear one of our own has wanted to give you a tour of our great city. Mind if I tag along? Your guards can wait right here. You bet. Trixie answered for Krivax. After all, who would turn down the High Tinker of all people? Their first stop was naturally her family home, who were all very excited to be hosting Jelbin and slightly less so Krivax, but her folks warmed up to him real quick once they realized how nice he was. Not that she blamed them since she had been scared when she had first laid eyes on Krivax and Masruk, and now she could call several Nerubians as some of her closest friends. Thankfully, despite being cooped up for over a year, her folks and most of the people in the city were just fine. After all, the city of Nerubian was well stocked with devices to handle its basic needs and protected with deadly technology. It said something that assaulting Ironforge was easier for the Horde than attacking Nerubian. People were still cleaning up the stains off the front gate last Trixie heard. Only the combat tinkers and flying scouts suffered at all during the siege with the Horde. Things hadn't been easy for them, but Trixie knew that it could have been much worse. She had seen what the Horde had done to countless human, Wildhammer dwarf, and even elf settlements they passed through after all. The point was her family was safe and in good spirits now that the fighting was over. And after over a year of worrying about them, so was Trixie. She did go to her room to have a good cry as the relief and bottled-up emotions came pouring out when no one was looking. Trixie's dad had found her when he went to check on her and simply hugged her until she calmed down. Man, that was embarrassing. Thank goodness Krivax and the High Tinker didn't see it and just thought she had gone to the bathroom for a long time. When she had come back, her younger siblings were attempting to reenact her stories of fighting with a new Bakan by clambering onto Krivax's abdomen and waving wrenches in the air. He took it in good cheer while her parents and Blinn were laughing madly at the children's antics. After visiting her folks, Trixie was happy and proud to show off her alma mater, Gearshaft University. Trixie was pretty sure the school was happier to see their more famous student, the High Tinker, though. Still, Krivax found the center of learning quite impressive, judging by his darting many-eyed gaze. He kept saying how such a place could easily compete with Vizier Ziggurats of Azrael Nerub, although he did admit the school was quite a bit noisier than said Ziggurats. As it should be in Trixie's humble opinion. Engineering and science was not and should never be a quiet thing in her mind. Once they got over their nervousness with the new tall spiderfolk, the students and educators of Gearshaft were happy to pester Krivax about his kingdom, people, and advances such an ancient kingdom must have made over the millennia. Krivax did his best to try and answer all the countless questions, but Trixie eventually had to go in and save him, much to his relief. In the end, High Tinker Blinn and Krivax made it clear that in time Azrael Nerub's viziers from the Technology Research Division would visit Nerubian and vice versa, so everyone could exchange ideas and go through each other's troves of knowledge. Trixie wondered how Nerubians would find gnomish education. While they were hanging out at the university, checking out the classes, and examining the numerous projects, Krivax seemed very interested in the various mechs and vehicles. One student apparently was inspired by Krivax's well-made natural design and brought out their own personal project they had started working on. Apparently, the project had originally started with a leg pack that mimicked spider legs, based on the study of giant spiders native to the Eastern Kingdoms. After hearing about the Nerubians' exploits against the Horde and Krivax's visit, said student had been inspired to complete the design. From there Krivax was challenged to a race on the walls and even the ceiling with the gnome student on his leg pack, which he gladly humored. In the end, Krivax ended up having to save the fool when his invention malfunctioned while totally upside down. Still, it was a learning experience about rushing designs and prototypes. The malfunction seemed to encourage him to perfect the design more and challenge Krivax again to another race in the future. Krivax even admitted that if his duties didn't take up the vast majority of his time, he would be very much tempted to take classes at Gearshaft like he did in Dalaran to learn about their technology in general. She thought he was crazy to argue that the gnome technology was magitech. Gnomish technology just being magic in a different form. Crazy talk. After the university, it was off to see the rest of the city. Trixie was glad to see that she could show off all that was great about the city, largely untouched by the war. All of it seemed to interest Krivax, though he seemed a little nervous at times at all the steam, arcing electricity, large moving gears, and other things that made up her home. It was all perfectly safe so long as you knew where you were stepping. It feels like no matter where we go, we are just in another part a giant machine of some kind, Krivax noted as they watched as a flying machine landed and was stowed back into the launch bay where most vehicles were kept. It isn't one big machine, is it? No, Nerubian can't just get up and walk around, can it? Oh my, no. Though now that you mention the idea. Jelbin got an inspired look in his eye. That was mainly a joke, Krivax deadpanned. And we might just take it as a challenge. Trixie responded. I mean, maybe not the whole city, but maybe make each piece its own mobile system, and they could reconfigure and rearrange themselves on their own. Jelbin picked up on what she was thinking. Maybe a linked power system that connects wirelessly with the city's generators. Have to keep in mind logistics, so each one would have to be self-sufficient and have their own resource-gathering abilities. Could make them all-terrain so they can travel around the land, sea, and maybe even fly. I feel like I might have started something both terrifying and amazing here, Krivax muttered to himself, while Trixie and Jelbin started really tinker-talking and mentally designing Mecha Nerubian. Sure, it likely wouldn't actually result in anything. Nerubian had whole vaults full of designs and blueprints of things that never even got to the prototyping stage, because they were too complex, resource-heavy, or faced a million other roadblocks. But that was part of the fun, dang it. I'm sure the ambassador eventually assigned here to Nerubian will fit right in once I find one who is as excited by technology as the rest of your people, Krivax eventually said. More than a few divisions will likely volunteer people for a chance to learn amongst you. We'll welcome them with open arms. More friends is always a good thing after all, Dublin said with a smile. After all, becoming friends with you in that Tuskar village led to you and your people helping save ours. Who knows what would have happened if we had never met, Trixie pointed out. I'm sure you would have managed well without us. Krivax started, but Trixie wasn't having any of it. Or maybe we'd have been much worse off. Don't sell yourself short, Krivax. I don't regret at all meeting you not so long ago, and I would hope you don't either, Trixie said with a stern face. Of course not. Thanks, Trixie, Krivax said with a nod. Now, what is that I hear about Robot Fight Night? He asked curiously. Oh, you're in for a treat, Jelbin stated, leading them towards a loud arena in the corner of the city. Welcome to the wonders of the magical sport of custom-made robots beating the bolts out of each other. Which led to Trixie watching Krivax dodging gears and springs as they flew through the air in the arena. She needed to teach him how to catch them. How else was he supposed to get souvenirs?